The Galactic Dominion had conquered 1,000 worlds. When they arrived in the Sol system, they expected another swift victory. The battle plan was simple: overwhelm humanity with superior firepower, crush their defenses in a single strike, and force their leaders to kneel. It had worked countless times before. It did not work this time. The Dominion fleet descended upon Earth like a storm. Their ships, black and angular, blocked out the sun, their weapons capable of turning continents to ash. Orbital bombardments rained fire upon cities, leveling them in minutes. Millions died before the first human counterattack even began. And yet, humanity did not surrender. The first sign of trouble came when Dominion ground forces landed in New York, expecting an easy occupation. They were met with brutal resistance. Entire city blocks had been converted into death traps. Civilians fought alongside soldiers, setting ambushes in collapsed buildings and sewers. Dominion officers, accustomed to quick planetary takeovers, watched in shock as their troops were torn apart in urban warfare. On the outskirts of Moscow, a Dominion general reported a disturbing pattern. Humans refused to retreat. They fought to the last man, to the last bullet. And when those ran out, they fought with knives, with fire, with their bare hands. They do not break, the general warned his superiors. They do not surrender. Then came the first major defeat. Above Earth, the Dominion's flagship, the Valkyries, prepared to unleash a final devastating bombardment that would wipe out the last human resistance. The Dominion had never lost a flagship in an invasion. Ever. But as they readied their attack, a seemingly suicidal group of human ships emerged from the debris field of the shattered lunar colonies. These were not military vessels. Many were repurposed cargo haulers, old freighters, even civilian transports welded with scavenge armor. And yet, they fought like demons. The humans moved unpredictably, adapting mid-battle in ways Dominion AIs couldn't anticipate. They exploited every weakness, targeting supply ships and communication relays rather than engaging in direct combat. Dominion officers expected them to act like a standard military, organized, disciplined, predictable. Instead, the humans were chaos incarnate. The Valkyries never fired its final shot. A fleet of human warships, thought to be destroyed months earlier, emerged from the shadow of Mars. With pinpoint precision, they delivered a single devastating strike. Nuclear payloads detonating inside the Dominion flagship's reactor core. In a brilliant explosion visible from Earth's surface, the Valkyries was obliterated. The first Dominion invasion fleet had been repelled. For the first time in history, the Galactic Dominion had failed to conquer a species on their first attempt. The shock rippled through the highest levels of their government. A new realization settled in. This war would not be over in weeks. It might not be over in centuries. Humanity had survived the first blow. And now, it was their turn to strike back. The Dominion was not used to failure. When they lost the first battle for Earth, they responded the only way they knew how: total annihilation. A second fleet, 10 times the size of the first, arrived within months. Their orders were clear: no more occupation, no more half measures. Earth was to be wiped clean. The Dominion launched a relentless planetary bombardment, turning once great cities into oceans of fire. Billions died. The sky burned for weeks. But the Dominion had made a critical mistake. By the time their second fleet arrived, most of humanity was already gone. They had fled, not in organized convoys, but in scattered groups, thousands of ships vanishing into deep space. Cargo haulers, mining vessels, warships, and stolen Dominion transports all disappeared into the void, taking with them engineers, soldiers, scientists, and the last remnants of Earth's surviving population. The Dominion believed they had destroyed humanity. Their officials declared victory. The war was over. Then the attacks began. A Dominion patrol convoy, moving through the shattered remains of Saturn's rings, was the first to disappear. The last transmission from the fleet's admiral was a garbled scream before static swallowed the signal. Days later, an outpost in the Proxima system went dark. A transport hub in the Vega sector was reduced to drifting wreckage. Entire Dominion battle groups began vanishing into the black, their remains found weeks later, gutted, airlocks forced open, crews missing. The humans had not been wiped out. They had become something else. A Dominion warlord, High Marshal Drinker, reviewed reports from the front lines with a growing sense of unease. The humans no longer fought like a conventional army. They struck from the darkness, appearing out of nowhere, then disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. Some Dominion officers called them pirates. Others whispered a different name. The Ghost Fleets. Admiral Karish, a veteran of 100 Dominion campaigns, refused to believe the stories. He personally led a fleet to a war-ravaged system where human attacks had been reported. For days, they patrolled empty space. No sign of the enemy. No distress beacons. Just silence. Then, without warning, Karish's ships began exploding one by one. Not from enemy fire, but from within. Human saboteurs, hidden aboard Dominion vessels for weeks, had waited for the perfect moment to strike. Entire crews were vented into space before they could fight back. Karish tried to send a distress signal. He barely had time to register the approaching human ships, patched-together vessels running on scavenged Dominion engines, before his command deck was torn apart by railgun fire. His fleet was gone in less than an hour. The Dominion had expected resistance. What they faced instead was a nightmare. Humanity had adapted. They had vanished into the void, only to return as ghosts. And now, there was nowhere in the galaxy the Dominion could hide. The war had only just begun. The war was no longer fought on battlefields. It was fought in the black abyss of space, where unseen enemies struck without warning, and no Dominion world was truly safe. Entire fleets disappeared. Supply lines collapsed. No matter how many ships the Dominion sent, the attacks never stopped. High Marshal Drinker had studied 1,000 wars, but none like this. Humanity did not fight for territory. They did not hold planets. They did not engage in honorable battle. They struck from the darkness and left nothing but wreckage behind. His advisors spoke of tactical failures, but Drinker knew the truth. This was not a war against soldiers. It was a war against time. The Dominion measured conflict in cycles. Wars lasted decades, sometimes centuries, but they always ended. Humanity did not see war this way. To them, it was not a temporary struggle. It was existence itself. Drinker studied their history. From the first days of fire and stone, humanity had fought. They had torn themselves apart in wars for land, for power, for survival. And yet, unlike other species that destroyed themselves, humans thrived in conflict. They were short-lived, but that was their advantage. Each generation was born into war, adapted, and passed their knowledge to the next. They learned from their failures faster than the Dominion could react. The same battle would never work on them twice. The Dominion's war engines moved at the pace of bureaucracy, slow and deliberate. Humanity moved at the speed of desperation, and desperation was the deadliest weapon in the universe. Across the Dominion's outer colonies, human attacks intensified. These were not the small hit-and-run strikes of before. They were surgical, calculated. A Dominion refueling station in the Talos system went dark overnight. A weapons research facility in the Voros Nebula was breached, its security codes mysteriously overridden before the reactors detonated. Even Dominion High Command officers were assassinated in their own quarters, their bodies found with cryptic messages scrawled in their own blood. No species had ever waged war against the Dominion for this long. Most surrendered. The rest were exterminated. But humanity refused to die. Even captured prisoners provided no answers. Dominion interrogators broke their bodies, invaded their minds, demanded the location of human strongholds. The prisoners only laughed. "We have no home," one whispered before biting down on a cyanide capsule. "Only war." Drinker knew then what the others would not admit. The war was not ending. It was evolving. The Dominion had started this war expecting to break humanity. Now, after centuries of bloodshed, something else was becoming clear. The Dominion was the one being broken. Drenker gazed at the growing list of lost fleets, fallen colonies, and abandoned sectors. He knew that if something did not change, the Dominion itself would become a footnote in galactic history, just another empire that tried to tame the humans and failed. This war had no end, because humanity did not fight for survival. Humanity was the war. The Dominion was bleeding. What had once been an empire stretching across thousands of star systems was now a fractured war machine, scrambling to contain an enemy it could no longer predict. Humanity had turned their own strategies against them, disrupting supply lines, assassinating high-ranking officers, even manipulating Dominion factions into civil war. And now, for the first time in 10,000 years, the Dominion was losing. High Marshal Drenker stood at the bridge of his warship, watching as the latest reports arrived. Another fleet destroyed, another shipyard sabotage, another world lost. The Dominion's rule had been absolute for millennia, but now its enemies were no longer hiding in the shadows. They were pushing forward. The attack on the Vorak Prime shipyards was the first true sign that humanity was no longer just resisting. They were winning. Vorak was one of the Dominion's largest military production centers, supplying entire war fleets. It was protected by dozens of capital ships and planetary defenses designed to withstand entire invasions. It should have been untouchable. But the humans didn't attack the defenses. They didn't charge in with fleets. Instead, they infiltrated. A single Dominion freighter, broadcasting an automated distress signal, drifted into Vorak's orbit. The ship was taken aboard a repair station for inspection. No crew, no cargo, just an empty hull. Then the lights went out. Seconds later, Vorak's orbital defenses turned against themselves. Turrets fired on friendly ships. Docked battleships detonated from the inside. Entire space stations went dark as Dominion engineers scrambled to regain control. By the time they realized what had happened, it was too late. Human ships emerged from the darkness, striking with brutal efficiency. Vorak's defenses, confused and compromised, fell within hours. The shipyards were annihilated. The war fleets under construction were left in flames. The Dominion's greatest military asset was gone, and humanity had barely lost a ship. Drenker clenched his fists as he read the final casualty reports. The Dominion had suffered catastrophic losses, while humanity had perfected their craft. They no longer fought as scattered rebels. They were now an empire of their own, ruled not by borders but by the laws of war itself. And worst of all, the Dominion's citizens had begun to lose faith. The cracks in the empire were spreading. Some Dominion factions, seeing the inevitable, began secret negotiations with human leaders. Others abandoned their posts, fleeing to the lawless edges of the galaxy. What had once been the most powerful force in the universe was unraveling. Drenker knew the truth now. The war was never about conquering humanity. It was about surviving them. For every species the Dominion had ever subjugated, war had been a means to an end, a step toward control, order, domination. But for humanity, war was not a means. It was the end. And for the first time in history, the Dominion was facing something it had never encountered before, an enemy that would never stop, an enemy that could not be broken. The Dominion was crumbling. Entire sectors had gone silent. Once loyal vassal species were defecting, some outright joining humanity's cause. For every world the Dominion tried to retake, 5 more fell to rebellion. High Marshal Drenker had fought countless wars, but none like this. This was not a war for survival. This was extermination, and the humans were winning. On Prime Theta, the Dominion's capital world, panic spread like wildfire. Riots erupted in the lower districts, fueled by rumors that human fleets were already inbound. The ruling council convened in desperation, debating the unthinkable surrender. But surrender to whom? Humanity had no central government, no single leader to negotiate with. Their fleets were independent war machines, some driven by vengeance, others by survival. and some by nothing more than the thrill of battle. There was no one to whom the Dominion could bow. The war had evolved beyond politics. It was now a storm of pure chaos. And then came the invasion of Valkyris Prime, the Dominion's last great fortress world, a planet fortified for 10,000 years, its defenses stretched across continents, guarded by entire armadas. It was the last unbreakable bulwark of the Dominion. It should have been impenetrable, but humanity did not break sieges. They burned them. The attack began with what seemed to be a retreat. Dominion fleets detected human ships fleeing the system, as if abandoning their assault. Dominion commanders, desperate for any victory, pursued them. That was the mistake. Because as the Dominion ships left orbit, Valkyris Prime's sky turned black. Out of the darkness, the ghost fleets emerged, long-dead ships, rebuilt with scavenged Dominion technology, undetectable until it was too late. They had been hiding in the planet's shadow for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. By the time the Dominion fleet realized the trap, they were surrounded. Human warships poured into the battle, weaving through defenses, striking with brutal precision. The battle in orbit lasted 13 hours, the longest single engagement in the war. But the outcome was never in doubt. The Dominion lost. Valkyris Prime's defenses collapsed, its planetary shield generators sabotaged long before the battle even began. As the first human dropships landed, the Dominion's elite legions prepared to fight to the death. They never got the chance. Human infiltration teams, already on the ground, detonated fusion charges beneath the planetary command center. Entire cities collapsed in fire and rubble. Valkyris Prime, once the jewel of the Dominion, fell in a single day. The message was clear. The war was over. But Drinker knew better. Humanity had not fought this war for conquest, nor for survival. They had fought because it was in their nature. And now, with the Dominion shattered, one question remained. Would humanity stop? Or had the war become all they knew? The Dominion was gone. What remained of its ruling council had flowed into deep space, its once mighty fleets now scattered remnants, hunted down by human warlords eager to claim the final kills. Planets that once feared the Dominion's rule now swore allegiance to their new masters, not out of loyalty, but out of fear. Humanity had won. But the war did not end. On the bridge of the Iron Requiem, Admiral Cade Mercer watched as human warships engaged in battle, not against the Dominion, but against each other. It had begun as small skirmishes, disputes over the spoils of war, arguments over who should rule the conquered systems. Some human factions, believing the fight was over, sought peace and stability. Others, forged in the fire of endless war, refused to stop. Mercer understood the truth before most. The war had never been about the Dominion. That was just the excuse. For centuries, humanity had lived and breathed conflict. It had become their identity, their culture, their purpose. And now, with no enemy left to fight, they had turned on themselves. The Velos Rift massacre was the first major fracture. What had begun as a diplomatic summit between two human factions ended in blood. A former resistance leader, Commander Rhea Solis, declared herself the rightful ruler of the new human dominion, claiming that only through centralized power could humanity survive. Admiral Mercer and his fleet disagreed. By the time the first shots were fired, the battle had already been decided. Solis had brought warships to the meeting, hiding them in the asteroid fields around Velos Rift. She struck first, believing she could wipe out Mercer's forces before they could react. She underestimated her enemy. Mercer's fleet, veterans of 100 Dominion battles, adapted instantly. Solis's ambush became a bloodbath for her own forces. Within hours, her fleet was in flames, her flagship breaking apart under relentless bombardment. But as Mercer watched the wreckage drift through space, he felt no victory. Because he knew this was only the beginning. Reports flooded in from across the former Dominion territories. Some human commanders were declaring their own empires, ruling over newly conquered planets like warlords. Others saw themselves as the true leaders of humanity, demanding loyalty through force. Mercer's communications officer turned to him, a grim look on her face. "Sir, we just intercepted a transmission," she said. "Another human fleet is moving on the Arden system. Looks like they're attacking one of our own." Mercer closed his eyes. He had spent his entire life fighting the Dominion, believing that once they were gone, humanity would finally be free. Instead, they had become the very thing they had fought against. The war was not over. It had simply changed. And Mercer, like every other human, had to ask himself one terrible question. Was there anything left but war? The final Dominion stronghold lay hidden deep within a dying star system, a fortress world known as Drenvar's End. Once a secret command center, it had become the last refuge for the remnants of the Dominion's government and its most loyal warriors. It should have been the final battle. Instead, it became a battleground for humanity itself. Admiral Cade Mercer's fleet, hardened by war, arrived first, intending to wipe out the last remnants of the Dominion. But he was not alone. Commander Rhea Solis, thought dead after her failed ambush at Velos Rift, had returned with an army. No longer just another rogue warlord, she now led the new human Dominion, a brutal faction that sought to impose order through iron-fisted rule. To her, Mercer was a relic of the past, an idealist who still believed in something beyond war. To Mercer, she was proof that humanity had gone too far. The two fleets met in orbit over Drenvar's End, thousands of warships facing each other across the void. On the planet below, the last Dominion soldiers watched, uncertain whether humanity had come to destroy them, or itself. A transmission crackled through Mercer's command deck. Solis's face appeared on screen, cold and resolute. "This is our chance, Mercer," she said. "The Dominion is finished. The galaxy is ours. But we need order. We need a leader. Surrender your fleet, and together we will forge something stronger than the Dominion ever was." Mercer exhaled slowly. He had known war his entire life. He had seen the Dominion's atrocities firsthand. But now, looking at Solis, he realized the truth. The war had changed them. Humanity had spent so long fighting, so long surviving, that they had become the very thing they once despised. If Solis won, there would be no peace, only a new empire built on war, ruled by those strong enough to seize power. "This isn't victory, Solis," Mercer said. "This is just another cycle of conquest, another empire built on corpses. We didn't fight the Dominion just to replace them with something worse." Solis's expression didn't waver. "Then you've already lost." Her fleet opened fire. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human warships tore into each other, their weapons lighting up the void. Mercer's forces fought with the precision of battle-hardened veterans, but Solis's fleet had numbers and ruthlessness. She had no hesitation, no mercy. To her, every human who stood against her was already dead. On the surface of Drenvar's End, Dominion soldiers watched the sky burn. Some fought, others surrendered, but most simply stared upward, realizing the cruelest irony of all. Humanity had won. And yet, the war was far from over. Above them, the last great battle of the old war rage. But it was no longer about the Dominion. It was about the future of humanity itself. The sky over Drenvar's End was an inferno of shattered warships and dying stars. Human fought against human in a battle that should never have happened. One final clash, not for survival, not against a common enemy, but for dominance over what remained of the galaxy. Admiral Cade Mercer's fleet was outnumbered, but not outmatched. His officers fought like they always had, adapting, improvising, surviving. Every loss was met with a counterattack, every weakness in Solis's fleet exploited with ruthless precision. But the new human Dominion was relentless. Solis had bred a force that knew only war, a fleet built from the strongest survivors of humanity's long, bloody conflict. They were warriors without fear, without hesitation. And they were winning. Mercer watched his fleet dwindling, his forces scattering. The war had consumed them all. It had to end. Target the Revenant, Mercer ordered. The Revenant, Solus's flagship, was a monstrous dreadnought, built from the bones of fallen Dominion warships. It was the heart of her empire. If Mercer could take it down, the battle might still be won. His remaining ships rallied. They punched through Solus's defenses, plasma fire and railgun rounds ripping through the void. A squadron of human fighters, a mix of scavenged Dominion craft and ancient Earthborn designs, cut a path straight to the Revenant's core. Mercer's flagship, the Iron Requiem, took heavy damage, alarms screaming through the bridge as its hull was torn apart. But it had one last shot. All power to forward cannons, Mercer said. His gunners locked onto the Revenant's engines. A single moment of silence filled the bridge. Then the Iron Requiem fired. The blast tore through the Revenant, cutting deep into its reactor core. Fire and debris erupted outward as the dreadnought trembled. Solus's fleet hesitated, just long enough. Mercer's forces surged forward. Human warships, barely holding together, struck with everything they had. Solus's formation collapsed. The tide turned. And then the Revenant exploded. Solus was gone. Her fleet shattered. The new human dominion had fallen. But as Mercer stood on his bridge, surrounded by the wreckage of what was once the greatest war in history, he did not feel victory. Only emptiness. The Dominion was dead. Solus was dead. But what had they won? His communications officer turned. "Sir, we're receiving reports. Other human factions. Remnant fleets. The Ardent Legion. Some are still fighting. Some are seizing former Dominion worlds for themselves." Mercer closed his eyes. He had spent his entire life fighting, believing there was an end. But now, standing among the ruins, he understood. Humanity had not fought to be free. They had fought because they did not know how to stop. Across the galaxy, scattered human warlords continued their battles, forging new empires, new wars, new reasons to fight. The cycle was endless. The war had no end, because humanity was the war.